Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gateway Speaker Series. We are delighted to have you here. We have been very eager to start this. We have been counting the days and weeks. I'm Lori Grun. I'm head of Gateway. I'm also a former trustee. I've been an educator in the city for 35 plus years. And perhaps most importantly, I'm the mother of a recent alum. I've seen Gateway through many lenses, and I am honored to be a part of this extraordinary community. As I said, we have been very eager to kick this series off, and we're going to begin right now. I'd like to begin by introducing our two speakers, and I'm going to begin with Carolyn Salzman. Carolyn's connection with Gateway began in 1998 when her son joined the school. She was elected to the Board of Trustees and served as chair from 2001 to 2005. In this time, Carolyn oversaw the growth of the school, our relocation to our current facility, the establishment of a development office, which is now our advancement office, among countless other initiatives, resulting in very significant school growth. In 2013, she was appointed head of school. In the ensuing 7 years, our enrollment grew. The program was redesigned to better serve bright students with language-based learning differences. The building was renovated to include a welcoming street-level lobby, a dining hall, a state-of-the-art auditorium, and a reconfigured middle school space. Finally, last year, in March of 2020, when COVID-19 hit New York City, Carolyn transitioned the school to a distance learning program. This platform impressed parents, faculty, and students with an exemplary system that remained consistent with the school's pedagogy. Over the years, she has been a key visionary in the Gateway School's legacy. Her inspiring leadership has left an indelible impact. Carolyn, welcome home.
Thank you. That is really a marvelous introduction. It kind of takes my breath away. But hello, everybody. I am thrilled. I am thrilled to be part of this series and to be back in touch with the Gateway community. I want to start by saying if there are any students out there, go Lions. You showed up. You stuck with this. You did the work. You bounced back when you were upset by something you didn't understand. And here you are today. You have learned a lot and you just keep going. So I also think you're probably pretty incredible tech wizards, and I may need your help at some point. With the parents, I think we have to acknowledge that this has been a traumatic time. Last April, I will never forget the first 2 weeks when we got back from spring break and the shock of having to no longer be in the school and move to remote instruction. And I think that it's been a period of enormous sadness and cost and anxiety. But I think we also have to think about the fact that you pulled through, and we're now on the cusp of really being able to think about how we're going to return to some, really beloved routines and activities that we've sorely missed, and certainly being back together with our friends and with our families. So congratulations. It has been hard, but we're here. Teachers, I just stand in awe of you. I mean, who ever thought that we would be doing direct, explicit, multisensory instruction over Zoom? And who thought that you would then subsequently simultaneously teach kids in a classroom with others remoting in over Zoom? These are challenging. They were challenging. And you brought enormous skill and judgment and tenacity. And you've been doing it. And you've done an incredible job. And I am amazed. And then, of course, there are our most marvelous administrators who led the school through this period, kept the program on mission, stuck to the pedagogy, and have continued to do what I call working the magic with our kids. And so my heart goes out to you. You have been incredible. So there may be some folks here who, I think Lori really covered who I am, but I'll go a little bit more to a personal side of it, which was that a lot of the motivation for the work that I did with Gateway really came from my position as the parent of a Gateway graduate. And when we brought our son to Gateway, he was 5 years old and he had all but given up on trying to learn. And in November of that first year, he was sitting at our breakfast table and he said something that, struck me to the core and has stayed with me ever since. And it was, he looked at me and he said, "I used to be stupid and now I am smart." And I was hooked. And all of my involvements with the school, as I was looking at, the campaign and the new building and what were the financial issues, what were administrative issues, what were management issues, I was watching the impact of this program on our son. And I was asking myself, how do you bring all of this together? Where does the program meet with the organization of the institution? And where it led me was, or my questioning led me, was back to school. And so I went to Teachers College and I got a master's degree in educational administration. I focused on administration in special education schools. And I really delved into the various pedagogies that were in play at that time, because there was a transition that was underway. And then when I had the opportunity to consider being the head of the school, I raised my hand, and it was really a real privilege in my life, and very much an honor to have been the head of Gateway for 7 years. And here we are today. In June 2020, I retired and turned the reins over to Lori.
Carolyn, thank you for that. But as a parent and as a colleague, I never tire of listening to your story and your wisdom. So thank you. Our other speaker today is Harold Koplewicz. Harold is the founding president and medical director of the Child Mind Institute. One of the nation's leading child and adolescent psychiatrists. He is known as an innovator in his field, a strong advocate for child mental health, and a master clinician. The mission of the Child Mind Institute is to offer best-in-class evidence-based clinical care, engage the global scientific community in visionary research to discover more effective treatments, educate and empower parents by providing trustworthy information and resources, and last, use passionate advocacy to remove any stigma associated with psychiatric disorders. Dr. Kopowitz has been repeatedly recognized in America's top doctors, Best Doctors in America, and New York Magazine's Best Doctors in New York. He was named WebMD's 2014 Health Heroes, one of them for his advocacy on behalf of children with psychiatric or learning disorders. He has been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology since 1997 and is involved with countless other organizations and has been a leader in this field for a significant time. Harold, welcome back to Gateway.
No, it's my pleasure. I was listening to Carolyn's story and I realized that my relationship with Gateway goes back as far as the 1990s as well, because first of all, I was working at NYU from 1996 for 12 years before I started the Child Mind Institute. And I was a collaborator and partner when the school was located, I think, on 17th Street or way downtown. But on top of that, my nephew is an alum of the Gateway School, and it was a transformative experience. But also, I have a child who has dyslexia. He's an adult now, And I listened carefully to when Carolyn tells that story, because when my son was 8 years old and in third grade, he actually had a physical altercation with another child in the school. He was attending Dalton, and we were surprised because he was a gentle kid. And when we talked to him, he said that one of the other kids called him stupid. And he said to us, I was always 3 steps ahead of everyone in math and at least 3 steps behind everyone in reading. And now they've turned math into reading, word problems. And someone called me stupid, and I think I am stupid because the smart kids are in the Hawks reading group, and I'm in the Sparrows reading group because that's how I read, and Hawks eat sparrows. And while we could laugh at the silliness of calling one group Hawks and one group Sparrows, it really hurt to see how quickly your child's self-esteem can be affected by their own self-awareness of how they are doing compared to other kids, and how they recognize what their struggles are, and how we as parents basically have to scaffold our kids. We have to recognize their deficits and really figure out how to make their deficits less. And we have to recognize their assets and give them the opportunities to feel good about themselves, whether it's athletics or math or music. And that becomes our job, which is really an exceptionally important job. And I think this topic this afternoon, is really quite important because we are living in an extraordinary time. The fact that this global pandemic affects every child's mental health is really something that we have to think about. So when we think about children's mental health and learning styles, 60% of the population is just terrific. They're the most resilient, happy-go-lucky kind of kids. It's amazing how bad things happen to them and they still are okay, or good things happen to them and they feel great. And even those kids, those 60%, are feeling the stress of distance learning, of fear that something is going to go wrong with their parents' health or their grandparents' health. They worry about the fact that there's no routine in their lives, at least for the first 6 or 7 months of this pandemic. The next group are 15% of kids who are subclinical, a little more quirky, a little more anxious, a little more inattentive, maybe a little more moody on an average day in America. And yet they never have symptoms that are that severe that they would ever go see a mental health professional or need a special learning school or even need a tutor. But nevertheless, under this kind of stress, those kids are more symptomatic. And then we have 20% of the population that do have a mental health or a learning disorder, 1 out of 5, the most common set of disorders of childhood and adolescence. 17.1 million kids compared to 200,000 kids who have diabetes, or 7 million that have asthma, or 15,000 that have cancer. And yet only 40% of that 17 million before COVID, in the best day in America, ever get help. So those 60% who have these disorders under these conditions are certainly struggling more. And then the last is 5%. 5% of these children have an incredibly serious psychiatric or learning disorder or developmental disorder. They have autism where they cannot communicate. They are not toilet trained. They're not able to socially join. Or they have a psychosis which keeps them out of touch with reality at times. Typically, a global pandemic like this would not affect them. They would be okay because they're either intellectually or psychologically not connected to the world. But this pandemic had an effect on our supply chain. Medicines didn't show up at drugstores on a timely basis. Day programs, social groups were all eliminated for 6 months at least, if not longer. So we live in a time of stress on our children that is truly remarkable. And as parents, we should also be aware that there's going to be a long tail on this psychologically. There's going to be a learning loss for many kids. They're going to have to make up that loss. I'm not really as concerned about that because I think with remediation, with kind of academic boot camps, with an enhanced curriculum, our kids will catch up. Basically, the way to think of it is anyone whose brain is younger than 24, they can learn things. They, put a 11-year-old in the middle of China without anybody else speaking English. 3 months later, they'll be communicating. Put someone as old as me in the middle of China without anyone speaking English. You'll come back and I'll still be doing sign language. So the academic losses will be made up. I'm more concerned about the kids who become too comfortable at home, who socially were always a little more anxious, had trouble with their interactions with other kids, or were a bit more separation anxious, had trouble on Monday mornings or Sunday nights, or after a vacation to get back to school. Those are the kids that I think are going to be more symptomatic. And we, as a whole society, for public schools, private schools, special ed schools, have to make sure that the teachers recognize that kids who have these symptoms might not look worried, might not look sad. They might be rambunctious. They might be more oppositional. They may be more irritable. And that has to be something there that gets expected. And we have to put more tools in the teacher's toolbox on how to manage those kind of classroom disturbances, because many of these kids for months will be having trouble with re-entry as the world opens up.
This talk is centered around teaching children with learning disabilities to become confident self-advocates during challenging times. I'm going to turn this one actually over to Carolyn. Carolyn, first let's start with how educators can support students. What are some tools and techniques they can use to build confidence and resilience amongst their students during this time?
Well, I would start with the fact that, first of all of these children they want very much to be in school. They are very excited. They're going to see their teachers. They're going to see their friends. And they're desirous of getting back into the routines. Routines are important that they know well and that they've missed. And at the same time, they're going to be anxious. And at the same time, as they come back into whatever setting they're in, there's going to be a strain. I mean, being together, whether it's for the length of a class or the length of a day or a week or day in, day out, week over week, the constancy of it is going to, requires pacing. So I think that the first thing is that when you welcome them back into school, you continue to teach them. It's not, they need to continue to be taught the skills, the strategies, the content that make them independent, that turn them ultimately into independent learners who have an understanding of themselves, and they have the ability to kind of pick themselves up and re-engage in a problem when it doesn't turn out the way they hoped the first time. So skills, strategies, and content, teaching them, continuing to do so, managing the pace of it is really what you do. You don't not do that. The second is, and this is very important with our kind of child, is you teach them in the way that they can learn. So you're thinking about research-based, scientifically validated instructional approaches and programs. So we know that it is direct, explicit, multisensory instruction, which is what, you're telling them what to do, how to do it, when they employ that skill or that strategy, you practice it, and then you reflect on their success or their failure, because now you're asking the question why, which feeds into self-knowledge and ultimately their resiliency and their ability to advocate for themselves. They ultimately need to know what they can do easily and well and what they have a more difficult time with. The second is that you don't lose control of your language when you are teaching them. You, in cases where you're dealing with young people who become very anxious, you want to think about what's the vocabulary that you're using, what's the thinking process that you're going through, make it transparent for them, model it for them, because you want to help them learn you want them to have them follow your train of thought, but you want to continue to support their developing use of language for thinking and learning. The last one really is structure, because you're dealing with young people who have challenges when it comes to executive function. At a minimum, you've got planning, organization, and time management. And you want them to take these strategies and you want them to internalize them. And so you provide them with structure that's transparent. Now in school, this might be something like in your class what we do at Gateway is we have the aim and the agenda. So you're telling them, this is why you're in class. Here's the goal. And here are the thinking steps, the thinking process that we go through, the thinking skills that we're learning in order to acquire the specific skill that we're addressing today. And they have that again and again and again over every class, and they begin to internalize the idea that you have a goal, there's steps that you go through to get there, and they take time and effort. And the transparency of it, the structure combined with the transparency, lets a child, lets a student have predictability. And when they have predictability, they're willing to take risks that are involved with learning. They're necessary for learning. So at home, it might be something like you have a weekly schedule, and you don't send it off to somebody else to make it. You make it together with your child. It doesn't have to be beautiful. And it's posted someplace where everybody can see it, because they know that you want them to do certain things. And so then you can create it together and you can talk about it together. But simple things like a dedicated place and time for homework, a dedicated place and time for independent reading every day. They may fuss about it at first, but just stick with the program and they find comfort in it and it will work. The basic thesis at Gateway, and I think for all really fine education, is that success is a very powerful motivator. And so when success happens and it kind of builds on itself, the individual's self-esteem rises because there are real accomplishments. They see them, they can own them. That's much more valuable in promoting self-esteem than all the attaboys and attagirls in the world. You want the student, you want the child to be able to really kind of own their accomplishments and really say, you know, I did it. And I think that with that, you get the kind of positive frame of mind and the resiliency that we're all looking for.
Thank you, Carolyn. That was great. So now we're going to talk to Harold to talk about parents. How can parents support their children? What are some tools and techniques they can use to build self-confidence and resilience amongst their children during this time?
So let's continue where Carolyn just left off about praise and the difference between attaboy and specific labeled praise. And so I think all of us, we talked about how kids were under pressure from COVID. We have to recognize that we're under a lot of pressure also. The Kline Institute just conducted a survey last May. They did it again in November, and they're going to do it again in this coming May, of 6,000 adults, half of them in the United Kingdom, half of them in the United States. From half of them, we asked for parental report, and from half of them, we asked them for self-report, looking for signs and symptoms of depression. And it was clear that if you had a pre-existing anxiety disorder or depression, you were more at risk for getting depressed during COVID. But if you eliminated that, if you didn't have one of those pre-existing conditions, it was for kids a lack of routine, life circumstances, distance learning, social isolation, not knowing the difference between Wednesday and Saturday, that, not getting dressed in the morning. And for adults, it was more COVID related. I'm going to lose my job. Something bad's going to happen to my parents. I don't know how I'm going to be able to maintain the finances or my social life. So it was much more COVID related, but it spoke to the fact that parents have to provide that structure that Carolyn was just talking about, that even during COVID, Monday is Monday. Wednesday is special because we're going to have pizza. Friday night's going to be movie night. Saturday, we're going to go out and we're going to make sure we're doing some exercise. So I think it's really important that parents continue to provide structure and support, but they have to catch their child being good at least 3 times before they say something negative and something even critical, constructive criticism. So think about it. That means that you can't track all the bad behavior. you have to track all the behavior. And so thank you so much for setting the table. You did a really good job. I really like it that you listened to me and you did such a nice job. It made me feel really good. Or thank you for telling me that great story. It made me laugh. That was really interesting. Thank you for cleaning up. Thank you for making your bed. Thanks for cleaning up. But finding positive behavior and ignoring insignificant off-task behavior. And so that all falls into the fact that we are not going to praise the product, we're going to praise the effort. So if someone gets an A, that's nice. But if they got an A because they didn't work, that's not as meaningful as if you saw how hard they worked on something and they were able to successfully pass and get a C. The effort is what we really want to specifically praise. The other thing that we have to have a different mindset, particularly living in New York City, is that failure is an option, that we learn from our failures, so that if your child doesn't win the race, doesn't pass the test, that's okay. There's some brainstorming. So how can you do it better the next time? Are there things that we can do together to make it better? Do you think that, maybe we could do more studying? Maybe we could find a more quiet place, perhaps less television or less video games, because it seems that you need more studying to be able to succeed at this. Or let's go out and throw the ball more times at each other, pitch and catch, because that's going to make you be a better player on the baseball field, which you want to be. So again, failure is it can be an option, but we learn from our failures. So not just praising the product, but praising the effort and catching our kids being good is one of the most important things, because it's those positive behaviors that make people feel better. By the way, if you do this for 2 weeks, where you consciously say, I'm not going to negatively track, I'm not going to talk about insignificant behaviors, I'm going to track positive behavior and do it 3 times for every time I do a constructive criticism, 2 things will happen. In the first 2 weeks, your child is going to think a body snatcher took the mom. What happened? But after 2 weeks, your child is going to give you more and more positive behavior, because every child wants to be praised. Every child wants to do well in school, wants to do well with their parents, wants to hear positive things coming from their parents.
Can you both, Carolyn and Harold, can you talk Carolyn, can you talk a little bit about what inspired you the most about Gateway students, and what are you most proud of?
I think that their heart, they have a real desire to learn. They try very, very hard. They are honest, and I think that as they feel more comfortable, and they kind of slip into this very kind world that they are joining. You see them arrive at school in the morning, and there is no balking about heading in through that door, going up the stairs, going up the elevator. They have all kinds of things that they are ready to talk about and show to their teachers and show to their friends. And I think that it is that kind of love of life, and knowing that they are going to grow up, and they're going to be, grow into who they are. And the inspiration is, I suppose, their enthusiasm, and knowing that you can make a contribution to it, and you can set them up, given the right education, teaching them the way that they can learn, you can set them up so that they will make their own choices in life, and they will join their communities, and they will kind of fulfill themselves. And that's what inspired me.
Thank you for that. As I listen to both of you, one of the things I would ask you is, what do you think a return to normal is going to look like for our children, and how do we help them get there? Harold,
so I would tell you, I think that the overwhelming majority of kids can't wait to get back to school, can't wait to get back to their friends and teachers. And I think it's going to be challenging that it's a new normal, right? That they may have to stay 3 feet apart from each other for a while. They might have to wear masks. They won't have the complete freedom that they had before of, kids like to hang on each other. They don't always sit in a seat and wait their turn. And I think that, with those minor adjustments, it is going to be a very positive experience. I think this summer is going to be great for them. I think that, the idea that they can go back to day programs, day camp, sleepaway camp, those things are those socialization skills, which is what I'm more concerned about, frankly, than the learning loss, will come roaring back. And as I said before, there's going to be a small percentage of kids who got too comfortable at home, who had a pre-existing anxiety set of symptoms. And therefore, the way to help them is with exposure response prevention, meaning now would be a good time for those teachers of those kids to call on them more often if they're still on Zoom. Distance learning. It's easier to hide on a Zoom class than in an in-person class if they're not in class. It's a good time for parents to say, let's have a play date with some social distancing in Central Park. Let's make sure that we're practicing more social skills in a way that, good parenting, scaffolding parenting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is about providing structure and support and encouragement. It's not fixing it, but it gives kids the opportunity. And I think that some of these kids, 1 out of 5, are going to need a little more practice and a little more rehearsal before they're going to feel comfortable again in school or socializing with friends.
Yeah.
Carolyn, you want to add to that? I would jump in here and I'd say that one thing in terms of as parents are thinking about their children as they go forward is that I would be very wary of kind of a world that surrounds us that brings forward ideas that are very tempting. So one is that, you could opportunistically jump from a gateway to a mainstream setting. And another is what Harold alluded to, which is this sort of concern over lost time in learning. I think that with respect to, if you want to sort of say, okay, maybe this is the moment to go into another kind of setting, I think you have to do 3 things. The first is you need to go to the school and you need to ask them whether or not they think your child is ready to go from a very highly structured setting that is devoted to teaching them the way that they can learn and teaching them how to use language for thinking and learning to a more unstructured, progressive, whole language setting that is not going to be as accommodating for their needs as what they've been in. Gateway's goal is to get them there. The question is how close is your child to being able to do that without undoing a lot of good that's been done? Key to that is, have they internalized the skills and strategies that they've been taught? So everybody talks to you about scaffolds for your kids. All right, scaffolds, they say removing them. When they talk about removing scaffolds, they're talking about that a second person, a third person, is no longer coming and reminding your child to do it. They now know that they need to take notes for social studies to extract the information from text that they're going to use when they go to create a thesis and make an argument in the paper that they're writing for their class. Do they know how to do that? And do they do it well? The other is, will they, in an alternative setting, be able to acquire additional skills and strategies that are going to be necessary at the high school level and for moving on into college? Those are really the questions to ask. The next is with respect to the lost time. Again, go back to the school. They maintain metrics, not only for the school's ability to assess its level of ongoing excellence and maintain its standards, but they have them on each child. And so they can talk to you about your child's progress on essentially what is their own trajectory. And very much what Gateway is about is a general program that's individualized for each child to keep each one moving along at their forward edge. The other is think about summer school. You know, we all want our kids back in camp. You know, heaven knows that, 8 weeks in the woods, swimming, getting sunburn, all of that, I loved it. I think that it would be great. At the same time, if you're really concerned, split it in half. Take end of July, end of June, a little bit of July, go to summer school, and then spend the second half of the camp season away at camp, and then you'll be home for a week, and then you're back in school. It's a way of kind of keeping their hand in. Maybe they learn a little bit more, but can be strengthening, and they'll be ready for the next school year. But I think that basically you have a solid plan in place. The pandemic has changed any number of things. I'm not confident that we really know what its full impact has been. And so just because I'm not sure that whatever it has upended has actually rendered your original plan invalid. So I think that growing and learning takes time. And with our kids, it takes special skill. And I don't think those have changed.
And I would say that there's no doubt that this is a good year for some summer school, in-person summer school. Gives kids a chance to go back into a classroom and get those muscles back. It's like doing some more push-ups and sit-ups. Not for maybe the whole summer. I love Carolyn's idea of maybe half and half, or 4 weeks, and maybe 6 weeks of summer of sleepaway camp or some kind of recreational time. But in general, I don't think it's a particularly great idea to let kids have 12 weeks or 10 weeks off without any academics, because it becomes stale and it becomes harder for them to get back into it. And there has been a learning loss for every child in the United States. By the way, the kids who are under 13, they're going to bounce back much faster. The kids who are 13 to 24, those are the young people who took the biggest hits during COVID. They lost things that they can't get back, whether it's something as simple as a senior prom or something as complicated as working for 4 years to get onto a varsity team or a ballet recital or to be the lead or a co-star in the school play. Those things have just disappeared, and we're not going to be able to give them back. Academic learning and academic accomplishment is something that we can give them back. We can quickly recover some of these losses.
Harold, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think as we listen to the idea of learning loss, the academics can be picked up, but what the impact that this pandemic could potentially have on our young people, particularly the 13 to 24-year-old group, is yet to be determined. I have to ask you, and I see it behind you. Harold, tell us about your book.
So I have to be very transparent about one thing. I don't love writing books. I wrote a book in 1996 called It's Nobody's Fault, New Hope and Help for Difficult Children and Their Families. I wrote another book in 2002 called More Than Moody, Understanding and Treating Adolescent Depression. And 20 years later, essentially, I wrote The Scaffold Effect. And it was really based on the fact that for the past 10 years at the Kline Institute, parent after parent comes to me and my colleagues and says, I'm worried about my child. I'm worried that I'm doing too much. I'm worried I'm doing too little. And that what I'm concerned about is the fact that they won't be independent. When I'm not around, how are they going to thrive? How are they going to survive? How are they going to succeed without my influence in them? And this has been truly a shift in the way we parented, because 40 years ago, or more, in fact, 60 years ago, when Benjamin Spock wrote his book, that revolutionized things. But in general, our grandparents certainly thought that they didn't have to play with us. They essentially fed us. They took care of us. They made sure we went to school. We were housed. And then there became more and more of a shift in the past 25 years, 30 years, to really take care of our children in a way that inadvertently took away their independence, made it more difficult for them to be resilient and self-reliant. So the idea of a scaffold effect is that parents are the scaffold and the kid is the building. And the scaffold consists of support, structure, encouragement, and there are planks. And the planks are warmth, awareness, patience, dispassion, and monitoring. And the scaffold changes as the building grows. So the scaffolding doesn't determine whether or not the child is a skyscraper, a mid-century, or a quirky Victorian. It just supports the child's growth and the building can keep changing. And I always tell the story that my oldest son, we always thought he was going to be a doctor. And it became very clear by 11th grade, he said, I don't like blood. I don't want to be a doctor. And he announced that he was going to be a DJ. I mean, okay, it turns out there were 3 white Jewish DJs, Mark Ronson, who's now won the Academy Award, and DJ Cassidy, who's really quite successful. And at the time, DJ Josh Kay, who continued to want to be a DJ through college, and then in the last minute between his junior and senior year, decided to work for a bank and now does private equity. And the scaffolding we needed to do had to move with that, the way the building was going up. And our second kid, as I mentioned, had a real learning disability, a very severe dyslexia. And that required us to make sure that he got the learning instruction that he needed for his building to grow. But the important part of being a scaffold is the scaffold itself. The parent itself has to be secure and have a solid foundation. And that means that self-care is truly childcare. And I wrote this book pre-COVID, but this has never been more true during COVID. A parent has to make sure that they're sleeping. They have to make sure that, and the New York Times just wrote that if you're not sleeping at least 7 hours, you're putting yourself at greater risk for dementia in your 70s. You have to eat. You have to do some exercise. You have to eat something, do something spiritual. You have to take care of yourself. And one always feels guilty for taking the time to do self-care, but self-care has never been more childcare than during COVID. And when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant says, put the mask on yourself before you put it on your kids, it empirically doesn't feel right, but it makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that if you're not breathing and you're not okay, you can't help your kid or your second kid or your third kid. So this concept of having a scaffold, by the way, which at times the scaffolding is going to come down. And if you do your job really well, by the time your kid is going off to college, he or she will know when they need a scaffold themselves. They'll go to the learning center at school because they're struggling with their first paper, or they will reach out to the mental health center if they feel like they're getting depressed or feel very anxious, because and frankly, that's what Gateway does. Gateway makes your kids self-advocates. If I need more time, if I need more help, I know it's not because I'm dumb, it's because I need this accommodation and I'm entitled to this accommodation. The same way that a kid who needs a ramp, or someone who needs to have larger print, or someone who needs, a hearing aid. These are all legally and rightfully important accommodations. And if a kid doesn't feel bad about themselves, feels that I am smart, I just need these things, the scaffolding that we've been doing gets to go down and they start providing their own scaffold. The important part about this, by the way, is that you can always become a scaffold parent. When I read the book out loud for Audible, which is very different than writing it or just reading it, I came home and said, boy, I wish I wrote this book 30 years ago, because there's so many times that I helicoptered in, or I think I was a concierge. I was worse than a helicopter, because I have a lot of trouble with dispassion. So that when my child, one of my boys, had a fight with another kid who was mean to him, I was ready to take a contract out on that kid. How dare that child hurt my child? And 3 weeks later, my kid was friendly with that child. So being dispassionate, not over cheerleading, not over criticism, not over catastrophizing when something doesn't go right, sends the message to your child that they can survive this latest injury, this latest setback, because you have faith in them and you will brainstorm with them and you have confidence that the next time around they'll run the race and they might do better, or they'll take the test and they'll have a different kind of outcome.
Carol, thank you for that. That really leads very nicely into some questions that we have been getting in the chat. I think as our audience listens to the two of you, you are inspiring them both, and you're really getting them to think deeply about our children and our children in this particular moment of time. So the first question that has come through is really for Harold. Harold, my child is struggling with making friends. He's in a new school and has limited interaction with students, particularly in this period of time. Do you have any advice for ways we can engage him socially.
Yeah, and so let's go on the assumption that our children all have different assets and deficits. You know, in the book, I talk about how my oldest son was by far the most socially reticent. And so we used to practice about shaking hands and asking another person a you question. You know, where do you work? Where do you go to school? What do you like to do? And we kept working on that because one of my other kids, you know, just could walk into a room and just start talking to people. So we all know that our kids have different assets and deficits. So if your child is by nature more socially reticent, is not as easygoing with making friends, we need to give them, and particularly now in a new school, where unfortunately, because of COVID, they have less interaction with them, it's okay to set it up so that they do have more interaction. It's worthwhile calling the school and asking them, are there ways for some of the new students, the other new students, to get to meet after school or on a Saturday in Central Park? Or is there a Zoom that we can arrange for them, and one of the teachers or one of the administrators can kind of be the moderator for helping these kids get to meet each other? And remember that most kids have a very, you know, when forced into these social interactions, they sometimes feel very, very stiff. You know, just imagine when you ask your kids the wrong questions, you get very simple answers. Did you learn anything new in school today? No. Did you have a good day at school today? Yes. You know, you go back and forth. And so part of being a scaffold parent is you have to be on the level of your kids. So you have to treat them like a client. You know, I don't like athletics, but one of my kids loved Michael Jordan. So I started following the Chicago Bulls. I knew who was the strong players and who weren't, who were the weak players, when they won, when they lost, so that we could talk about that. And I think practicing with our kids social skills is, again, something that can be fun and can be done, again, in not a judgmental way. But without some exposures, it's going to be very difficult for our kids to get past their natural reticence or past a natural deficit that we have to help them with. So I would reach out to the school. The schools are overwhelmed now, and some of them have forgotten about new students. I've heard this from several high schools that took new ninth graders, and the ninth graders feel very much alone on a Zoom call, and the teachers are struggling to teach on distance learning. So the idea of setting up the structures that would typically happen for new students hasn't. And I think that means that parents have to get the school to help them with this, whether it's setting up a play date or setting up some kind of social interaction with a group of new kids to make it easier for their kid.
Thank you for that. I would certainly concur that it's been challenging for new students in new schools. Carolyn, the next question is for you. Can you share what advice you would give to an educator who's looking to concentrate specifically on special ed?
Oh, well, I think that first, I think you have to pick your population because it's not one size fits all. Mm-hmm. You really need to understand which group, whether it's whether they have a physical disability, whether or not it's more in the mental health realm, or are you interested in learning disabilities, or are you interested in autism? Because the research that has gone into how to work with each of these different populations and what they need is different, and it is segregated. And so first I would pick my population. Second, I would then figure out, I'd find the best research on, what is accepted practice for how to work with them. And then I would find who are the real leaders in that field, and see if you can go and talk with them and engage them and study with them, and kind of narrow your focus so that you really hone your expertise and figure out whether it is then a curriculum or an instructional focus. I think Harold can talk better about the mental health area, but I would try to be very specific. When kids are very little, you are going to get advice that they need language therapy, they get counseling, and they have occupational therapy. And all of that is very good for a while. But when they start to reach school age, they all need something different. But even now, as there's been more research into how these problems show up when you're very little, when you're 1, 2, 3 years old, there are other things that can now be done beyond that. And so you want, and with all of this, you want to be talking about early intervention. So you want to understand what are the arrays of supports and interventions that can be put in place very early on. And that's what I would suggest.
Thank you for that. Harold, we just got one that is a sort of a follow-up to what we were just talking about. My ADHD child struggles socially. In addition to being at Gateway, we have him in a social skills class and do park play dates with classmates. In your book, The Scaffold Effect, you talk about the impact helicopter parenting can have on a child. Do the same rules apply for a child with severe ADHD who requires much more support socially than a typically developed child? Is stepping in to help them advocate for themselves when they can't seem to figure it out, harming a child such as mine?
Well, let's differentiate between what a helicopter is versus what a scaffold parent is. So It sounds to me that this mom or dad is scaffolding, right? If you recognize that, yes, my kid has a language-based learning disability, how terrific that your kid is a Gateway. I mean, you just have to listen to the kind of passion that Carolyn has and that you have, and to just visit the school to see how exciting the place is in addressing kids who have these barriers to learning, and that how they they learn how to get over those barriers. They become more resilient. But if you also have a child who you recognize has social deficits, how important it is to give them the opportunity to learn how to have better social skills. That's not a helicopter. That is definitely providing those opportunities. The important part is not to go in and fix it. So that if you see that your child is having difficulty, it's okay to let them struggle. And then afterwards, talk to them about ways that if they recognize that they would like to do it differently, how they could do it differently. The problem with jumping in, being not having dispassion, which I was talking about, how you're swooping in to try to save the child from their awkwardness or from the insult that someone gave, sends the message, you're not capable, you're not able to do this. And even though they may have deficits in their social skills, there are different ways of helping them develop those muscles without making them feel bad about it. In the book, I think one of the things that's interesting about the Scaffold Effect is I talk about my own foibles, and not only about the successes with patients, but with some of the mistakes we made with one of our kids, or all three of our kids. And one of them I talk about Josh, who did have a lot of social reticence, and how we kept practicing shaking hands and looking people in the eye long enough so that they could tell you what color their eyes were. And we would we would do it in a very light way. Come on, you shake hands with me. Oh, that was too tight. That was too fishy. And then all of a sudden, a test arrives. We're in Central Park at the Central Park Conservancy, and Commissioner Henry Stern, a very quirky guy, comes in, says hello to me, and says, "You're a child psychiatrist. I'd like to meet your kids." And Joshua, who's in second grade at the time, goes over, and he shakes hands with Henry. And I say, "Joshua, Mr. Stern is the commissioner of parks." And Joshua says, "Oh, what do you do as the commissioner of parks?" And he says, "Well, I make sure the grass is green and the ponds are filled with water and the horses are fed." And Joshua says, "So check, that's a you question." And then Joshua says, "How do you get a job like that? It sounds like it's very interesting." Check, 2 you questions. And Henry says, "Where do you go to school?" Joshua tells him. He said, "Tomorrow when you go back to school, look around the classroom, figure out which one of your classmates is going to become mayor someday, and stay friendly with him. That's how you get the job." Went straight over Joshua's head. It's time to say goodbye. Joshua gives him a good handshake, check. And then he leans in to say goodbye to Commissioner Stern. And he gets so close to Commissioner Stern's face that either he was going to make out with him or do an eye exam. And Henry is a little taken back. He walks away. And then Joshua says proudly to his parents, his eyes are brown. Now, we didn't criticize him. We told him all the good things we did. We next time did some practicing about how far away you should be from someone's face to tell us what color their eyes were. But the fact was that this was not easy for him. This wasn't an easy thing to be social. Versus for another child we had, it was easy. So being able to do it in a light way, being able to practice the skills, being able to specifically praise when the skills are done well, like a great handshake, great you question, and then to be able to modify when things need a little more practice and rehearsal is the best way to do something like that without helicoptering in and saying in front of Commissioner Stern, Josh, back off, you're too close, because that will humiliate him and that will destroy the whole fun of learning new skills. And that, it's not only Joshua, it could be lots of different things. It could be learning, reading, whatever the deficit is, it can be turned into an asset and make a kid feel good about the progress that they can make, the skill that they can learn.
Thank you for that. We have time for one more question. Carolyn, you have a unique background as a mother of a child with learning disabilities and as a former head of school of an LD school. What is something you would tell yourself as a parent about partnering with professionals teaching your LD child?
Be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that from my side as a parent, one of the early experiences that my husband and I had was that we disclosed kind of a variety of different things that we had noticed. And while we had gone to professionals with various expertise, none of them had pulled it all together for us. None of us had kind of explained to us how, as a person, you're all kinds of things are intertwined, and one area affects another. And so I think that that moment of honesty paid off for us over the years and for our son in a way that we could never have estimated or known at the time. And then throughout it, over the course of, time, remain honest with yourselves about what you are seeing. Don't shove something under the carpet because it doesn't fit with your vision or your notions of how things should be. You've got to be honest. I think on the other side, with the professionals, I think you have to expect them to never pull their punches. And it's very hard, having been on the professional side, but sometimes you have to sit there and tell a family something that that they really don't want to hear. And that they're going to be angry and upset with you. And, you kind of sit there and you have to say, please, don't shoot the messenger here. But because that truth in the conversation between the professional and the parent is the only way forward if you honestly want to help a child. And so I think you have to expect that of yourself. And I think you have to expect it of the people you work with. I'll add another thing, and it kind of ties in a little bit with what Harold was saying. I'll try to be brief. One of the issues in helicoptering or prompts parents to helicopter, I think, is that you feel guilty. So Harold wrote a book called It's Nobody's Fault a very long time ago. I read it. It changed my perspective on a lot, and I recommend it to everybody. It is not your fault what's going on here. And you have a responsibility here to teach and guide and help your child grow and develop. And it's only going to be as good as you are in many respects. If you're feeling guilty all the time, you're going to overcompensate. Step back, understand, you didn't do anything wrong here. Child is the way they are. Get on with the business of helping them grow.
I think that's really important, Carolyn, because this is a journey. And one of the pieces of baggage you let go of is fault. Now parents can make it better or they can make it worse. And so it's our job to try to make it better. And better is going to be different for each child, depending on what their deficits and assets are. But I think that it's a journey. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who's a psychopharmacologist, I love when you give medicine and the kid can pay attention, or you wait 4 weeks and the kid's depression lifts. This is a longer journey. And I think when journeys are long, parents have to be forgiving of themselves. They have to be able to say that they sometimes made a mistake. They will self-correct. They'll figure it out. It's one of the few things you can say, I want to do over. I didn't handle that well. I'm going to handle it better next time, or immediately apologize. But to recognize that this is a journey, and sometimes we need help with this journey. We need Sherpas to get us up the mountain and down the mountain. We need great educators. We need great mental health professionals, great tutors to make this journey for us easier so that at the end, our child can truly be independent, resilient, self-reliant, and be the child that will have the most opportunity that they can have.
Thank you both for that. You've absolutely nailed it. And I would suggest that when families are completely honest with themselves and when they are partnered with the right school, they recognize that not only is it not their fault, but there is nothing wrong with their child. That indeed a school such as Gateway is ideally situated to support and advance students now and always. This is a place where students are known, loved, and appreciated for exactly who they are and who they can be. So for those of you who are listening, who are not connected to our community, I invite and encourage you to reach out and learn more about our program, and also to contact the Child Mind Institute to learn more about their services, and absolutely to, if you have not already, to purchase The Scaffold Effect and other books by Dr. Koplewicz. I want to thank you all for helping us start off this speaker series. We have been incredibly excited about it. I think it's been a great inaugural presentation. I want to thank our two speakers, Harold and Carolyn, and I look forward to seeing many of you on the remaining 5 or 6 series starting tonight with our extraordinary alums. I will see you all soon. Carolyn, Harold, thank you for your wisdom, your guidance, and your, as well as your humor and compassion. It's been great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always my pleasure to work with Gateway.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.